Good afternoon. It's so glad to be back. Welcome to the next chapter. I'm Beryl McCleary, also known legally in the law field as Beryl Thompson McCleary. I am so glad you're here today. We have some excellent guests this week. I've missed you. And we're going to start off with introducing to you today Monique Worrell, who is running for the Office of State Attorney here in Orange and Osceola County. And we wanted to give you an opportunity to get to know her and ask questions. So feel free to ask questions. We're going to start. Monique, welcome.
Thank you.
We're so
Thank you so
glad
much for having me.
I'm glad to have you. So we have a few questions and we're going to dive right into it because time is short there. So tell us a bit about your work background and what were some of your defining experiences that have led you to choose a public interest career?
Yeah. So I started my career in this community as a public defender 20 years ago, representing those who couldn't afford to pay for an attorney. And I went out into private practice where I continued to represent individuals who were charged with uh, crime. And I left private practice. Well, I actually didn't leave private practice, but I boiled my private practice down and limited the number of cases that I was taking because I was recruited by University of Florida, which is my alma mater and yours, to come back as a law professor. And there I started the Criminal Justice Center, where I developed a robust training program that has produced many of the criminal law practitioners across the state and some throughout the country. After 17 years of practicing and training future lawyers, I left to become the director of the Conviction Integrity Unit as an assistant state attorney in the state attorney's office. And I led the development of the unit for conviction integrity, where we investigated claims of wrongful conviction. I was then recruited by Reform Alliance, which is a national nonprofit organization that was founded by Jay-Z and Meek Mill, and their purpose is probation and parole reform. And there I developed their legal team. I was chief legal officer and advocated for probation and parole reform across the country.
Well, that's
So
very
I,
interesting that you work for the University of Florida at the law center there. That is just incredible credentials. That is absolutely delightful, as well as you have mixed up your career with a practicum. But for those who may not know, please tell us, what does the Office of the State Attorney do, and why should everyday Floridians care about this particular position?
So that I think is probably the most important question, because the position of state attorney and the seat of state attorney is often neglected by voters for that very reason. People don't know what the state attorney does or how it impacts their everyday life. But what's really important to understand in the midst of the national outrage over the deaths of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, it's important for people to understand that, yes, people were outraged because those individuals were murdered, but people were even more outraged because there wasn't anything done about it, or if something was done about it, it wasn't done in a timely fashion. And what I need people to understand is that the state attorney is at the very heart of that outrage. The state attorney is the one who decides who to charge,
Yeah.
what charges to file, and
Mhm.
if there's a conviction obtained, what sentence to seek. And the way that fits into these murders is because in the case of George Floyd, there wasn't an immediate arrest. And when there was an arrest, the charges that were filed were considered by many to be less than what should have been charged.
Yes.
In the case of Ahmaud Arbery, there were months before charges were even filed, and only after the video became public for everyone to view. And as we can see in Breonna Taylor's case, there still haven't been any charges filed. So the state attorney is essential to maintaining justice in the community.
Oh, you're so correct. I appreciate that. So tell us after that, what was the tipping point for you to decide to run? And why do you want this position at this time?
So, if you asked me 2 years ago if I would run for any political office, let alone the state attorney, I would have told you absolutely not. I never had any political aspirations. I still don't have political aspirations. But one thing that I do have is a strong desire, a history, and a career that has been built on criminal justice reform advocacy. So everything that I've ever done in my career has been for in furtherance of
Yes.
criminal justice reform. And when I went to work in the state attorney's office, I realized for the very first time that I had been fighting for reform on the wrong side of the bench. And the reason I say that is because as an assistant state attorney, I learned that some of the things that we know lead to wrongful convictions were very much alive and well in practice right here in our state attorney's office. For instance, we know that the leading cause of wrongful conviction is eyewitness misidentification, but the state attorney's office still actively objects to the defense attorney educating the jury on the unreliability of eyewitness identification. And the state attorney's office still seeks to obtain convictions based on one eyewitness, even though research shows us that this is the leading cause of eyewitness of wrongful conviction in this country, and as well as many other practices. So I realized at that point that in order to change the system, we have to change the culture of prosecution. And we have to be more about fairness, equality, and justice than we are about just convictions.
You're so correct. I really appreciate that as a defense attorney. I faced that yesterday in identifying the physical therapist who was taking care of my the services that I needed. And I said, well, there were two guys with dark hair. And they started laughing. It's only two guys that work there. And the physical therapist says, the other guy's totally bald. I'm the only one. I said, there we are, the unreliability of eyewitness testimony.
Yeah.
Right then and there. And I've been working with both of them. But let's
right.
move
And
on.
there's data that backs that up. So for us to ignore it means that we are culpable to wrongful convictions.
Absolutely. Absolutely correct. Absolutely. That was my point yesterday. I had just spoken and worked with the person who did the therapy on Friday. And then on Tuesday, I assumed that all the guys had dark hair and the other one was totally bald. Misidentification. But let's move on. You grew up between Brooklyn and Orlando. So why run in this state? What about your time in Florida has attracted you to this office of the state attorney?
Right. So I was born in Brooklyn. I'm not going to say exactly what year, but in the 70s, I was born in Brooklyn. My family moved to Orlando in the late 70s. So we were here shortly after I was born. And we were here in Orlando until 1987 when my family relocated back to New York. And I was in New York from 87 to 96. So I went to college in New York and I came back to Florida to go to law school and made Central Florida my home at that point. So I have spent my entire legal career as a Florida barred and licensed attorney and practiced here in the Central Florida community. So there wouldn't be another place for me to run for office other than the community that I've served my entire career.
Oh, excellent. Excellent. My next question for you is, what makes you different from the other state attorneys in the state of Florida or elsewhere?
So, what makes me different is that I am a true progressive. I am progressive at, I believe, for us to get something different, we have to do something different. So we cannot continue to do the same thing and expect a different result. That is the definition of insanity. So to put someone who has been a lifelong prosecutor in the seat of state attorney means that whatever the values are that have been in place for the entirety of that individual's career are the values that we can expect that individual to perpetuate because they were raised in that system, they believe in that system because they stayed in that system, and that any changes that they would make would be superficial and not changes that would go in depth to the problems that I think we can all see in our criminal legal system. What are those problems? One, we are overly punitive. We focused mostly on incarceration instead of on treatment, rehabilitation, or restorative justice for the victims. If a victim does not want to proceed with the agenda of vengeance, then typically the state attorney's office is not interested in representing the interests of that victim. So, what I want to do is change the culture of prosecution, offer services to victims, whether or not I'm able to prove their case, offer services to victims who may not want the person who's accused of offending against them to be incarcerated, offer services to defendants that can help them get their lives on track instead of throwing them into prison for them to come out 3 to 5 years later not being any better, and most times often worse than they were when we sent them there to begin with. So I want to change the entire culture of prosecution because we have increased our prison population by 300% since the 1970s. We have a $2.4 billion prison budget at this point, yet we have failed to make our communities any safer, and we have failed to decrease recidivism. So if we want to do something different, we have to make different choices in the individuals that we put in the positions to affect our communities.
Excellent. So well said. I appreciate that. So what specific policies will you pursue if elected to reduce the number of people incarcerated in prisons and in jails?
So, one, my office will no longer ask for cash bail. Cash bail only serves the purpose of criminalizing poverty. If you and I commit a crime and we have similar backgrounds and we commit the same exact crime, and neither one of us are deemed to be a threat or a danger to society, but you have $5,000 to bond out and I don't, the only thing that we've done in that situation is separate the haves from the have-nots. We've not done anything to make the community safer. We've not done anything that would ensure my return or yours. The only thing we've done is said, Ms. McCleary, because you have the money, you can go home, and Ms. Worrell, because you don't, you cannot. So one of the things we will do is stop the criminalization of poverty by no longer requesting cash bond.
Oh, excellent. Thank you. My next question for you are: the conditions of release often include prohibitions that are difficult to avoid, such as curfew violations or associating with groups of people from shared communities. Would you encourage police departments to limit arrests for violations of release conditions that do not harm or pose a risk of harm to others?
So, yes, I would certainly encourage that. However, as the prosecutor, our role will be to request release conditions that are relevant to ensuring the safety of the community and ensuring the return of the accused. Those are the only reasons, because remember, our Constitution says that we are innocent until proven guilty. So, if we are in fact innocent until proven guilty, then we should not begin penalizing people at the point of them being accused. So, in putting in place release conditions that ensue unnecessary surveillance and supervision that in no way makes us safer as a community, it's not necessary. And what it does is it just sets people up to violate those conditions. So, my office will only seek release conditions that ensure the safety of the community and ensure the return of the accused to answer for whatever it is they're being accused of in court.
All right. Well, what will you do when you get the objections from the alleged victim or a victim's family? How will you handle that?
So, what victims and their families have to understand is that the state attorney doesn't represent any one entity. We represent the entire community. And as state attorney, it is my job to ensure that individuals who are accused are treated as though they are innocent until they are proven guilty. However, my job is also to ensure the safety of the community. So, if pretrial detention is necessary for the safety of the community, then my office will seek pretrial detention. If there are certain release conditions that are necessary to ensure the safety of the community, then we will do that. But we will not use cash bond as a means of doing that, because the only thing that that ensures is that people who have money can go free,
Right.
while people who don't will sit in jail. So it'll be for me to explain to the victims, to the families, to their communities that this is the way we're going to do it and this is why, so that they have an understanding of the reason. It's not that I don't care for victims. It's not that I don't want to protect victims. I do, and we will do everything that is within our power to do that. However, I don't believe that you do that by imposing cash bail and unnecessary release conditions.
Oh, excellent. Well, thank you for explaining that. My next question for you would be, do you believe that the state attorney's office has a duty to reduce racial disparities in the criminal legal system?
Absolutely. So if you look at, again, statistics, because I believe in doing things and being data driven, African Americans make up about 19% of the community in Orange and Osceola County, yet 50% of the prison population. So to say that there are no racial disparities in our system is false. What we have to do is address how we can address those racial disparities. And while implicit bias training is a great start, and I think it's encouraged and should be done, we have to go a step further into recognizing that in addition to implicit bias, there's also overt bias. That is a thing, and we have to address it. And reviewing based on how people handle those racial disparities within their own caseloads. So that means that upon the review metrics, we're looking for an absence of racial disparities in how cases are resolved. And if there are racial disparities in an individual's caseloads, then we need to have a discussion about why that is so, and then find a resolution. Is there more training that is necessary with regards to these biases? Is there actual racism going on within this docket? We have to address those things head on. We have to confront them so that we can resolve them. That's the only way to do it. We can no longer tiptoe around a problem that is so pervasive in our system.
You mentioned a matrix. Is research of matrices used now, to your knowledge, within the Office of the State Attorney in order to measure the different imposition of sentences and et cetera?
As far as I know, the only metrics are convictions, and that's how people are measured. Their success is measured by how many trials they have, how many trials they win, what's their conviction rate, and that's what we use to determine the worth of a state attorney. My metrics will be based on how much justice do you achieve, and how do we define justice? Is justice only based on convictions? I would say it's not. I would say that justice is based on how you can make the community stronger and safer. So putting someone in prison for something that was never a danger to the community to begin with, to me, that's not to be applauded, because you're not making the community better by doing that.
Right, thank you. I find it's interesting because I had an interview with two former troopers who won't come publicly, and they talk about the culture of law enforcement and how even though they had moved through the ranks, they were not able to do much about it. In fact, they were separated from it, and they were very disturbed by that. And then we talked about, Black men who live in Windermere who were followed and other and harassed and et cetera, coming from the grocery store until they got to their gated homes, et cetera, et cetera. Just a number of things that happen in some adjacent counties. Because this is the culture of the police officers. It is like a boys' club, boys and men's club. They are not your employees. So how can you work with them effectively when it comes to arrest and convictions? Or work with the sheriff or the chief of police effectively in instances that pose such an issue of a police culture based arrest?
So it's important for people to understand that I'm running for the top law enforcement position in the Ninth Judicial Circuit. So, of course, I have to work with law enforcement to ensure that my platform for reform can actually take place. And I believe that the vast majority of men and women who join law enforcement do so because, like me, they want to protect and serve their communities. And in doing that, you mentioned a culture. I just got off the phone with a law enforcement officer before I joined this interview with you, where we talked about just that, that the culture of law enforcement can be problematic. So, what I believe is that we can change culture. We can change culture to look at how we can do things differently to make our communities stronger and safer. And it doesn't have to be the way it's always been done. And I will express my desire to the different chiefs of the agencies, whether it be OPD or the sheriff's office or any of the other municipalities, on how I want the culture to be. Now, ultimately, it's going to be up to them
Yes.
to have that culture penetrate their agencies. But I believe, as the top law enforcement official in the Ninth Circuit, I can set the standard for what the culture of prosecution in this circuit will be, and that law enforcement can follow.
Excellent. Thank you. Transparency in public office is critical to build trust and confidence between residents and their government. Given the crucial role of the state attorney's office, providing the public with a clear understanding on how government authority is used takes a heightened importance. Thus, what are some ways you will bring transparency to the state attorney's office, if at all possible?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest problems with lack of public trust is the lack of transparency. So there are many things that cannot be public. However, there are many things that can be public, particularly because we are in, Florida, which has the sunshine laws. So there's a lot of information that can be public. I intend to make public any new policy that I implement or any policy that I change. I intend to keep public data with regards to the racial disparities in the criminal legal system. I intend to keep public data with regard to diversionary programs. I also intend to impanel members of the community as part of the team that will provide me recommendations on what cases death should be sought in. So I plan to be extremely transparent because I understand that if I am elected, the public gave me a job and they need to tell me what they think about how I'm doing it.
Excellent. Thank you. With that, what standards would your office use to determine when to prosecute a police officer who engages in misconduct? This has been very prominent in our local news. It's been around a long time. What would you do?
Well, the first thing that I'm going to do is expand my conviction integrity unit that I started to include government corruption. And I want the public to understand that they will no longer only have the law enforcement agency that they are accusing of misconduct as the outlet for where they report that misconduct. That when the misconduct is criminal in nature, that they can report that misconduct directly to the office of the state attorney, and that my office will review those complaints. And where that misconduct arises to brutality upon citizens, if we investigate and find that there is validity to that complaint, that those officers will be prosecuted. I believe wholeheartedly in prosecuting at the stage where the brutality does not cause serious harm or death. So those law enforcement officers that we catch on video who punch or kick individuals who are in custody and they're handcuffed and they can't defend themselves and they're not resisting, those officers need to be prosecuted. Because what we see in these cases that end up in death, very often there was a history of misconduct and brutality from that officer
Yeah.
before there was a death.
That's
So we have to stop that, before it occurs. One of the things that has recently come out has been that, Orlando Police Department is notorious for awarding law enforcement officers with Officer of the Year awards, despite the fact that they have repeated allegations of
yeah.
misconduct in their history. So certainly the public will not feel safe or confident in reporting misconduct against someone who the department has awarded with the distinction of Officer of the Year. So we have to do something different if we want to achieve something different. And that's one of the things that I'll do.
That's excellent. Well, of course, we know this is a political position. We know that the current state attorney was faced with some challenges with our governor on a position that she took publicly as it relates to the death penalty. So my question is to you. You are an African-American woman. You are progressive as far as those matters of changing the culture of the state attorney's office. But what will you do when you are met with direct conflict and opposition from the governor's office or those who are in line with the governor? What would be your position and how will you react? Those forces are very strong.
What I need the voters to understand is that anything worth having is worth fighting for. And that if you look at our history, we have constantly met opposition. There was opposition to ending slavery. There was opposition to ending segregation. There was opposition to ending redlining. And there will be opposition to ending mass incarceration. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't fight to do it. It doesn't mean that it cannot be accomplished. So, yes, there will be opposition. I have conversations with individuals every day who say things like, you just want to let everyone out of prison. And that is not true. The reality of it is, the vast majority of people who are in prison are there for drug and property crimes, and they're not a danger to our society. And locking people away doesn't make us better. As a nation, we incarcerate more people than anywhere in the world, but yet we call ourselves the land of the free. And in the state of Florida, we incarcerate people at a rate higher than the national average. That is not okay.
Yes.
And people need to realize that just because it's now normalized doesn't mean it's okay. So yes, there will be opposition, and I will stand and fight against that opposition. And I won't I won't win every battle, but I won't lose every battle either.
Well, what would you like us to know about you that will help viewers to vote for you?
And thank you for asking that question, because I know that I am the least known candidate in this race, and people want to know, who am I, where did I come from, and why they should vote for me. My name is Monique Worrell. I am a first generation American. My mother was born in Costa Rica. My father was born in Jamaica. I have been a resident of Central Florida for about 25 years. I'm a mother. I have 3 sons, 3 African American boys. So the outrage of the community is very personal to me, because when my 14-year-old son asks if he can walk up to 7-Eleven, I have to consider whether or not he'll come back to me alive. That is a very real consideration. And that is all a part of the need for change in our criminal legal system. So this is not just something that I decided to try on. It's something that I've been fighting for my entire career. You can trust me because you can look at my history and see that it's all I've ever done. I've never tried a case in civil court. I've never done anything for real estate law. The only thing I've ever done is fight for criminal justice reform. And that's why you can believe that as your state attorney, I will continue to fight for criminal justice reform, because we cannot be free until we are all free.
Then the next question is, before we leave, imagine that I was a white female or a white male or a Hispanic or anything but Black. My question is, are you going to fight for me the same way? Are you going to look after my interests, or are you just going to look after those of color?
That is a great question. That is a great question. And the reality of it is that when we have fairness and equality in any system, but in this specific context, in the criminal legal system, then that's fairness and equality for everyone, for everyone. Right now, the racial disparities say that Black men and women are 2 or 3 times more likely to being arrested than their white counterparts, or 2 or 3 times more likely to being sentenced to prison than their white counterparts. Equality means that we all get the same opportunities, we all receive the same treatment, and we are all assisted according to what our needs are. So, yes, would be my question to every single ethnic group. When I fight for fairness and equality, it's fairness and equality for everyone.
Well, that is excellent. We have a few questions, but we're going to go. And for those of you who are submitting questions, we will get to those questions and answer them individually. We're coming to the end of our program. I want to thank Monique Worrell for joining me today. I hope you were able to find out something about Monique and her extensive experience in the criminal justice reform system. She is the least known, but she is very powerful, having worked at the University of Florida for years as a law professor, as well as having to work in both the public defender's office and in the state attorney's office. So she has insight. And so I would invite any of you to go to her website, find out more about her, and make your choice as to who you decide to be the state attorney for the Orange Osceola office. We are at this point looking for progress and looking for change. And we thank you. You have a great day, and we will see you later, and the best to you. Again, vote August 18th, 2020. You have your choices. Meet and greet Monique Worrell for the Office of State Attorney. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. And you can find out more about me on my platform at moniqueforstateattorney.com. That's MoniqueFor stateattorney.com. You can also find me on Facebook at Monique for State Attorney and on Instagram at Elect Monique State Attorney. Thank you so much for having me, Ms. McClary.
Thank you. Yes, yes.